right, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm your host, Courtenay, and I'm super passionate about moving and thinking. On this show, we are going to dive into all things health, fitness, personal development, lifestyle, and political, sociocultural. I've always been fascinated by people, and I love learning from the experiences and stories of others. This has been a treat for me, and I hope this is enjoyable and useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or any way that I can make this a better experience for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Hello, welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm here today with David Burstein. He is a dentist, he is a father of 3 teenagers, and he has recently written a book with a really awesome title, Smartphones Don't Give Hugs, which is very, very true. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Courtney. It's fine. Great to speak to you after all of this time.
Right? Yeah. I remember we met, I think it was like early 2020 on a Jordan Peterson thread, right? Yeah. Discussion group.
That's right.
Yeah. And I remember you talking about this idea that you had to write this book. So it's really exciting to see that it's real. It's happened.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
If you can maybe tell us a little bit about what made you decide to write this book.
Okay, well, I think it goes back to the fact first of all, I'm divorced and I don't see my kids as much as I would like. But what really got me is that I was sensing that since I heard that kids were not learning cursive writing.
Crazy.
I said, there's something missing. This does not make sense to me. Their communication skills are suffering. And then I got to realize, in addition to their basic communication skills with something like writing, I said, what else is wrong? And then I started paying much more attention to it. And then when I heard about statistics about teenage depression and teenage suicide, and even in relating to my own children, I was saying, you know what, there's something wrong here. And there would be times when I'd be asking them questions and they'd be saying, and they would say, well, I don't know. Now I realized when I was speaking to an 11 and 13-year-old at the time, well, they're 11 and 13-year-olds. It wasn't due to the fact that they're on their iPhones all the time. But I just felt that the fact that they were not able to articulate what they wanted to say, I think they were a little lost, emotionally lost. And I think learning how to communicate well is a cornerstone of really knowing yourself and communicating with others. And then the whole thing I realized there's a great line by Evan Carmichael. He says something to the fact that communication is the currency of social energy.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Really good line. And I've realized, okay, that and what loneliness is all about is about a gap in our levels of social energy. So it all sort of comes together. And then what happened is last summer, when I was off of work for a couple of weeks, I sort of needed a project. And I saw in my on my table, there was one of these self-help books that was done by a physiotherapist in Toronto. And I said, hey, maybe that's what I should be doing right now. And I just decided I've been writing pithy articles for over 30 years. And I said, you know what, maybe it's time to bring everything together. And the book is the final result, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, no, it's super, super exciting. What is if you were to distill the main takeaway that you want people to get from your book, what would you say?
Very simple. The potential sanctity of conversation.
Yeah.
This is potentially holy. What we're creating here, you and I are coming into this conversation. We're putting our egos aside.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to create something that's of mutual benefit. We have a problem. What do you think? What do I think? What do you think about that? What do you think? And again, try to help solve a problem. So at the end of the conversation, we both built something bigger. And I realize, one of the things about the book is I quote Jordan Peterson so often. It's like, I must have quoted him like 10 times in the book.
Wow.
but to me, he's just, no one has pegged me. Like, I'm in my 60s right now, and I just said, oh my God, I wish I was pegged like this when I was in my 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So I really pay attention to what he talks about. And I was being able to formulate these ideas on my own, and then just appreciating the importance of conversation. One of the great lines that I have, there's this Canadian actor, his name was Michael McGee. And many years ago, he did a documentary for a program called The Originals. And the title of his interview was "Conversation is My University."
Oh, wow. That's profound.
Yeah.
It resonates so deeply for me because, and I think most of my audience knows, but I will reiterate, that's part of why I started this podcast. I started it about a little over a year ago now. And it really was because we were so locked down and so disconnected. I think I was feeling that long before the lockdowns happened. And I was really hungering for intellectual stimulation through conversation and discourse. But certainly it was exacerbated by the lockdowns. And because I'm hearing impaired and everybody's wearing the mask, I was really, really struggling to be able to communicate with people. And so it was a huge challenge, and it was creating a lot of anxiety and depression for me, to way more than I would like to admit. And I felt that if nothing else, being able to see people's faces and being able to have conversation and discourse and learn from others, because I think it is one of the ways, this is something Jordan Peterson talks about in his books, Maps of Meaning, more so than, his more recent works. But, he talks about how we are, the mythological creatures, and we have a priori storytelling, both capacity for learning and sharing. That is something really innate and intrinsic to humanity. That is how we learn, because we were one of the only creatures who learns by proxy, and storytelling is one of the ways to do that. And I think that conversation, especially in an age today where, people really unfortunately don't read nearly as much, and their communication skills are in a way retarded. I mean that in the literal sense, they've regressed. And as a result of that, I think they do learn better through conversational formats than they do in more traditional academic or, literary formats.
You make a good point. And when I think one of the interesting things about watching a conversation is, okay, not only here, but I remember one of the most important conversations I saw is the first time Dave Rubin interviewed Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, it was one of the most engaging hours and 40 minutes. And I sat back and said, oh my God, it's like, there are times in life you sort of say to yourself, where do I belong? And you just had a feeling. I said, oh my God, these guys are talking on a level that is so challenging and so great that I want to be part of this. And then you realize that, it's really funny how Jordan Peterson got into trouble. Why is it that 75% of people who attend your lectures are men? What's wrong with them? And I realized after all of this time, somebody should be just saying to them, well, men want to have a good conversation. They want to be heard. They want to hear that their point of view is being listened to, and they don't have to worry about how they don't want to be challenged. I shouldn't say challenged.
No, they like to be. What came to my mind actually is challenge. That's what I was going to say. I'll let you finish first, but then I want to address that.
No, but again, people want to be. There's a great line that once you've been touched by, and my other guru is Dennis Prager. Okay, so one of my favorite Pragerisms is, once you've been touched by death, you can never be the same.
Very true. Very true.
And you say, I want better. I want more. I want deeper. I want bonding.
Make the most of life, right?
Yeah, for sure. You want to get. My biggest problem is I'm too serious. But on the other, but on the other hand, it's like, this is where I get enjoyment.
Right.
This is where I extract meaning. This is where I get insights. Everybody's trying to figure out, this is, what is the wisdom I want to transfer to my kids?
Right.
Like all of this stuff. And you just, and it's funny what's happened in writing the book is, although I don't live up to everything I talk about, but I'm much better with my listening skills. I'm much better with saying, well, what do you think? There's a line I quote Harold Kushner at one point, and I say, he once wrote that the foremost religious words ever written are, "I may be wrong."
I may be wrong. Yeah.
I may be wrong.
I think it's something we can pretty much all guarantee we will be at some point.
Yeah. But most people, but it's funny, most people don't know how to say I'm sorry, and you're right.
Right. This is true. I do want to address your point about, Jordan Peterson and his audience being largely men. I think one of the reasons for that is that he really hones the importance of personal responsibility. And I think today we live in a very emasculated society. And I think men in particular, I mean, certainly women too, but I think men in particular are hungering for, a place to feel like they are challenged and they can take responsibility, and that they are, they're needed to lead. And I think that is something that Jordan Peterson really addresses to them. That it's not, things are just going to be handed to you, and this is this easy kind of a life, and you're just entitled by sheer fact of your birth. There is this element of that you have to rise to the occasion, and that you do have to take on the challenge. And, as I said, I think it's true for all human beings. We all want to feel that we're capable. We all want to feel that we matter. And we want to feel that our life has meaning and purpose. And I think meaning and purpose are nuanced differences, but we want to feel both. Absolutely. But I think there is something really intrinsic to men and masculinity that is, to feel that they can take on the challenge, they can conquer. And I think he very much speaks to that. And I think that's why. Yeah.
Two points. Many years ago, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I had a throwaway line that I said, that's interesting. And I said, it's more important to me to have the respect of my father than to have the love of my mother.
Wow.
Now, I sort of say, just the fact that the thought came out of my mind, I said, where does that come from? And that's basically, again, I want, maybe male love is much more conditional. Maybe female love, and that's what. And again, this is where we have to learn from one another. And again, I think for a lot of men, they want to be respected, and they want to be respected by their elders.
Sure.
But you say this line to a lot of women, they can say, well, can you translate that into English?
Well, that's interesting.
But let's put it, a lot of.
I totally get it. That doesn't seem foreign to me at all.
Yeah, well, you're a special lady, but don't kid yourself.
Thank you.
But no, but it's interesting that this idea of what men want and what men need, and again, with getting back to what Peterson's talked about. I actually got on Prager's show a couple of weeks ago, and I phoned in because especially what went on politically in Canada with the Freedom Convoy and our distrust of Trudeau. And I said, many years ago, a guy called your program, and he says, what's the most important institution in the United States? What do you think is the most important institution, Courtenay?
The family.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
I think the family is the most important institution universally.
Okay, well, it's interesting because this guy who phoned in says it's the individual.
Interesting. I don't think the individual is an institution. I see. Yeah,
Fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, the individual is absolutely first and foremost, but I don't see
Yeah.
it as an institution. So I
Okay,
get
very, that is a very good answer. Like, let's put it this way: if the person would have said the family, I wouldn't have trouble with it. But I guess part of what goes on in our lives is we need that balance between family or individual and society, and we don't want to be a captain in our own home.
no, of course. Yeah.
But we want to be known. And there's a story I tell in the book about my father. My father was also a dentist, but he also had a hobby of being a sculptor.
Wow.
And he said that when he won his first public prize, it gave him a sense of belonging, that he says, yeah, well, we always thought he was good because he's our father, but this to get public affirmation of what his quality of his work was like, just gave him a boost of confidence, like nothing else.
Wow.
And so, that's one of the challenges with the book in certain ways, is I'm sort of taking all of these ideas I've had for years that family members said, yeah, Dave, that's a great idea. And so trying to test it in the public, and you say, okay, I'm not crazy.
Yeah. So there's this element of validation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Men want respect, and they want respect from their women.
Sure.
They want to earn their respect of their women. Like, again, this whole idea of unconditional love. It's like I say, well, I love my kids, but you know what? If one of them is being an ass to another one, I can't really say that, okay, this is acceptable, that at this moment in my life, I love you as much as I love the child that you're abusing.
Right.
That you're being mean to. It's like, sorry, but
that's a really interesting point, because again, bringing back to the family, I think it's a really interesting distinction between how mothers and fathers operate in child rearing, and why it is so important to have mothers and fathers, because there really is a difference. I'm sure people are going to argue there's always exceptions to every rule. I'm not saying that other unique situations can't work out and that you don't raise wonderful, lovely human beings. That is always possible, but there is a reason. It is a yin yang, and men are very different in how they raise children. And the roles that they play as father is incredibly different than the role that the mother plays. Again, there's some crossover, and not to say that sometimes they can't play each other's role for a bit and have it work, but for the most part, men are disciplinarians, and children need that. Children are testing boundaries. They want to know. Part of how they know that they are loved is that those boundaries are there. That's part of how they feel safe. That safety comes from knowing that the boundary is there. The parent is not going to let them fall, because there is that boundary, and the parent isn't going to let them just run wild. We have something as human beings, it's in psychology, they call it risk homeostasis. And so that's where, the analogy would be like if you had absolutely no speed limits, people would actually but monitor themselves, because they don't want to be so reckless, because then there's the increased threat of danger. And vice versa, if the speed limit then pushed really low, people start to push that envelope, right? They start to go maybe 5 miles over, 10 miles over, because people want to find that balance to figure out where, the safety net is, and where the envelope is, where the boundary that they can push the envelope is. And that's the same thing for children. And, the mother's role is much more to nurture, to, be there to provide. And when you talk about unconditional love, I think it's really fascinating, because I think unconditional love can come from both, the mother and father, but it comes in very different ways. It's the feminine type of unconditional love is a much more nurturing kind of accepting, tolerant, patient. And a lot of that is biological. It has to do with the fact that they're dealing with the infants, in a much different way than the father would be. And yet when I think that fathers absolutely have unconditional love, as you said, you love your, all your children, and you want to make sure both of them are, protected and honored, but you have you have different boundaries that you're setting for them. You're also setting examples and disciplining them in a different kind of a way. So,
in many ways, it's like a parent has to let their child fall on their ass.
Yeah.
You have to, like, as much as you want to be protecting your child, but you're preparing them for real life. And even though it's going to hurt, or it may hurt, in order for them to really learn the lesson, you can talk all you want until they do it, and until they fall on their own, they're not going to learn the lesson.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to say, okay, like if a child has to, if he, let's say he didn't do as well on a test as he could have, I said, well, how do you feel about this? Or did you really work hard enough? And there have been actually times I let him study on his own.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't do as well, and he realized, oh geez, I really do have to hunker down a little bit more. And then he hunkers down, and then he does better. And they say, oh, now I get it.
Right.
Where in life do you get that now I get it moment? And you say, I also wanted, relative to what you're talking about, I totally agree with you. And I'll always remember, a little bit before your time, there was this program called 30 something.
Okay.
Back in the late 80s. And there was a scene where a father was looking on his wife holding their baby.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, it's not that you love her anymore, you just hold her differently.
Wow. Yeah.
And just realize, okay, and the differences between the men, like you were saying before, the problems with the emasculating of men. Why is that happen? I don't know, or maybe men have taken the easy way out, or the woman's lib has been great for women, but at the same time, it shouldn't be the defeminization of women. It should be, you want everybody to reach their potential, regardless of wherever that is.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that women's lib has really done much to help men or women, to be quite honest. The first generation of women's lib, I think, had certainly several points of merit. I'm not one to say that women shouldn't have careers and can't work and shouldn't have their place in the workforce, but I think this actually done a lot more harm than good. I think it's done a lot to destroy the nuclear family. I think it has emasculated men, and it has masculinized women.
Mm-hmm.
Women have been forced to take on roles that are not, intrinsic to them and to their strengths. And men and women are very different, and they're very different for a reason. So I think that I really do believe that it was by design. And I think it was by design, first and foremost, to destroy the nuclear family. And I think we're seeing a lot of that. I think we're seeing a lot of the challenges in relationships as well are as a result of that. It's confused men, and it's really hurt women. Now women seem to think like they can have their cake and eat it too, but it doesn't work that way, So.
Peterson makes a really interesting point in which he talks about the significance of the birth control pill. I think we actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think we may have had a text discussion about this.
Yep, I think we did, yeah.
And how profound, like the social glue of our sexuality, it's been taken away. And like even last night, I was having a discussion with my daughter about abortion, and it's like, and she's coming up with these reasons, and again, it was like a typical 14-year-old girl, so I wasn't surprised that I was just very happy to have the conversation. It was very sweet. And then it asked her certain questions, and you could sort of say, I hadn't thought about it that way before. And but you just realize that the social glue of the birth control pill may have been one of the most important developments of the 21st century.
Yeah.
20th century. And the profundity, like all of us, like I was saying to my daughter, okay, purpose of sex, enjoyment, bonding, and procreation. And it's like the whole procreative aspect of it was like it was dismissed.
Yeah.
In a way that I said, no, Ellie, no, the responsibility of going to bed with somebody. And I said to her, my final line to her, with the timing was great. I said, but Ellie, it's not who you go to bed with, it's who do you want to wake up with.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's
beautiful. And who do you want to be there in the morning? And you realize if you can't say to yourself, I want to be with this person in the morning, don't go to bed with them at night.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, we're so fixed on pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Pleasure and relinquishing a responsibility. I think the birth control pill, and when you look at the history of it, it was created by eugenics. So it's worth noting that. Yeah, it was created by the eugenics, and it's also really worth looking at, the moral fabric that was destroyed by it, the consequences of, relinquishing the responsibility. That's a huge, when you take that action, you need to know the weight of that action, and you need to know what the potential consequences are, and to be prepared for that, and I think it's also the value of life. The value of life has been so greatly diminished, and in some ways it has been by the abortion and the birth control movement. And again, the abortion movement was also created by eugenics. The abortion was also created by eugenicists. So they're linked. They're very much linked. So that's it's hard not to look at that and then see where we are today. So
yeah, let's put it this way: it's a factor that hasn't been addressed properly.
Yeah.
And again, I got to be very careful about making a comment about how women who've had abortions feel 20 years later if they never had children of their own. But it's one of, you got to be very, this is in all seriousness, one of the things with writing this book is I got to be very careful not to offend anybody, because I'm not here to offend anybody, because I'm here to just to get a discussion going about loneliness.
Sure. But I've long, given up my concerns about offending people. No. I don't intend to offend anybody, but I also, I preface everything with these are my views, these are my perspectives, and you certainly don't have to agree with me, but I hope that they spark, some sort of inquiry and, discovery process for others. So not to just look blindly, accept whatever they have always followed, to start to question their own beliefs and the beliefs that have been fed to them. So
yeah, well, you just made an interesting, you said discovery process, which is, I think, very important, because what I realize when you have a discussion with somebody, I'm not going to change your mind about anything.
Well, you might.
All I can do is get you to say, that's an interesting idea. I never thought about it that way before.
Right.
And then sort of give you that little shtuch of maybe you have to rethink this.
Plant the seeds.
Plant the seeds. And that's one of the ideas of learning how. There's a wonderful idea called the law of the farm. Stephen Covey has this thing called the law of the farm. And basically what it's about is you have to follow natural law. Like you can, let's say if you want a flower to grow or you want a plant to grow, you don't just say, okay, plant, grow.
Right.
You gotta know when to plant. You got to know how to plant. You have to make sure the ground is softened. You got to make sure there's no wind. You got to cultivate it and fertilize and weed it and do all of these things, and things will unfold on their own.
Sure.
And that's just the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all you can do right now is sort of have a discussion with somebody and say, okay, like the way to describe it is you can have the most ripe seed in the world. But if the ground is parched and there's a 50-mile-an-hour wind blowing, it ain't going to hold. It ain't going to take.
It's true. Yeah.
And so in the whole thing of having the whole process of changing somebody, you have to say, okay, what do I have to do to make this more receptive? Like the whole thing, I would imagine the whole world of marketing and advertising. You just don't say, hi, buy this product now. And this is why, for example, in doing this podcast. Now, by the way, I want to thank you so much. This is my first public discussion about the book.
Yay!
So thank you very much.
I'm honored. Thank you.
And take it as a compliment. I really do appreciate it.
I do.
You will be remembered. No matter what happens with this book, I'll always say Courtenay Turner was the first one who had the gall to interview me. But you just realize that if you want to grow, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It's a process.
Yeah, absolutely. Have your kids read your book?
No.
They haven't.
It's actually quite funny. I think for a lot of people in my world, they haven't been as enthusiastic about it as I would have hoped for, because I think what they're worried about, that there may be something that they may perceive as being embarrassing to them. Like, let's say when I make a comment about, well, what do you think? I don't know. Or what prompted me to write the book was a concern over their development of their communication skills, or they're so addicted to their phones, and all of a sudden they resent the fact that I'm giving them a hard time, and then I'm going to write a book about it and say my kids are spending too much time on their phones. But and again, in many ways, I wrote the book as a legacy to my kids. Like I said to my son, I said to my twin son the other day, I said, Jack, isn't it great that you're going to be able to give this book to your son? And I really, so like, and you love your kids to death, but on the other hand, you don't want, nobody likes to be embarrassed. And I think it's a question of whether or not they trust me enough. Again, I didn't say anything embarrassing at all to embarrass anybody. And I think it's all balanced. And this is why you have editors.
Yeah. So I have a couple of questions as a result of that. But the first one is about the smartphones. So, because that is the title, right? So smartphones don't give hugs. So in what way do you think that smartphones have, contributed or exacerbated the problem of loneliness?
I think it's a convenient out. It's a convenient not having. Well, you don't have to deal with another person. You don't have to deal with the physicality of another person or where you get your stimulation. You're getting it from the wrong place. Like the idea I came up with the other day was when you have a smartphone, it's if a person's thirsty, you need liquid.
Sure.
Now, are you going to have a sports drink or are you going to have a glass of water? When you're hungry, are you going to have an apple or are you going to have a donut? And I think for the most part, the stimulation that you get from a smartphone is much more donut related. Like they both lead to dopamine. They'll both lead to dopamine release,
Sure.
but you want the dopamine release to be for something that's substantial. One of the things from my limited knowledge with dopamine is that it notices change. Or it gives, so the point is what is changing? You can say, well, what's changing is the fact that I'm noticing that something bad is about to happen, or I notice that the image on the TV just changed. And just the notice of the change is enough to use some dopamine. Well, that's not what the dopamine is meant for. It's meant for something much more purposeful, because when you think about it, the amount of change that goes on in the world right now, it's constant.
Yeah, it is.
As a matter of fact, it's so funny having this discussion. As a matter of fact, chapter 7 is all about how we choose to react to change as a determinant of our loneliness. And but the thing with my kids is I think they're getting too much they're getting too much stimulation from the videos that they watch on their of the games they play. That's the main thing. Again, like I could try to sound sophisticated. Oh, well, I watch YouTube videos all day long, and then I realize, well, YouTube videos are junk food for adults.
Totally.
I don't know about you, but I put on my computer in the morning, and I go to YouTube, and it's like there's just so much good stuff. There really is a lot of great content.
Yeah, there is. There's great stuff.
But at the end of the day, what did I really learn? And ultimately, what I'm trying to do with myself is realize that life is all about a balance. And and even in writing the book, I've let myself go physically. I should, and if I had to do it all again, I would have said, okay, David, for every hour that you spend writing the book, you have to do an hour of exercise.
Wow. Yeah.
I should have done that.
Yeah. I don't know about every hour.
Okay, but or have a certain ratio to make sure that you're because we're physical beings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And like, listen, your whole thing with your movement business.
Yeah.
Like you get it about the importance of being athletic, and you're talking about the electromagnetic beings, is that there's the electricity coming from the heart, there's electricity coming from the brain, and what goes on between the two of them, and our heart feeds our brain, and our brain feeds our heart. It's just that's just the way it is. And there's been too much lack of physicality. Maybe relative to what we were talking before about the differences between men and women. Men define themselves by what they create outside the home. And in the past, I would say women define themselves by what they created within the home.
There's a lot of truth to that. And a lot of times, I think men and women both want to be respected, but it is in different ways. Men do want to, as you said, that the work they do outside the home, they want their women and their loved ones to admire and respect that, what they're building, what they're creating that is external. And I think women are, much more, they're nesters. And so they want to be respected and admired for, what they contribute, a lot of, their essence and what they bring. And in their nurturing and that kind of contribution. Absolutely. But I mean, I think they definitely want to be respected as well. And I think that is, but it is much more for, more of a core internal versus external. Yeah.
And again, that's why we need each other.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not, when I remember when I was single, it's like, I'm not looking for David Burstein with a uterus.
Right.
Okay, you want somebody to be different. Although somebody made the impish comment, they said it would be a lot easier to be married to somebody of the same sex, because you basically know how they think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's the challenge.
Yeah, but I think that but then you don't have the balance, right?
Right.
That's exactly, you don't have the balance, and really it is all about, and you don't have the ecosystem. I think what's really, really fascinating about just life in general, and I think farmers really understand this. You were talking about the law of the farm, and farmers really do, because they witness it every day, and every being has their role, right? And it's what makes everything work. And it is about balance. When one thing is out of balance, you have complete chaos and disorder. And I think that's the same thing. Like, you don't want too much, of the same. That's where the male, female, they balance each other out. So
what amazes me is, like, what you say makes complete sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And how we live in a society where I think people don't live up to that.
Mm-hmm.
They're afraid to admit that that's what they would like. Like, again, like with what you're saying before about the family.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I just can't believe that people don't accept that that is ideally how things should be, because I think because they perceive as being a failure if they didn't. It's like, okay, I'm divorced.
Mm-hmm.
I'm man enough to admit, well, it would have been better in life if my wife and I could have found what we needed to do to stay together for the sake of raising our kids. But even for to be in a good marriage, like, there's, like I've always said, there's nothing about you always have to add, when done properly. When a good marriage is done properly, it's the best thing. Now, obviously, a good single life is better than a poorly done marriage.
Sure.
But you can't admit that at the end of the day, you would want that great, solid marriage.
Right.
But I don't understand why people can't admit it. Doesn't make me any less of a human being because I can say I had a failed marriage. Okay, so this is what happens.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, all things being equal, the amount of aggravation and stress and everything of going through a divorce, sometimes you have to. But geez, it would have been a lot better if we could have worked it out. But again, obviously, I'm not alone.
Sure.
And so what it is that right now, if things don't work out, you say, okay, fine, but the kids are number one. The kids' welfare is number one. And like, to me, it's like, why can't you at least admit it? But people, I think, are so, I think a lot of what goes on, people are desperate for attention.
Yes. So you talked about dopamine, right? And we live in a constant dopamine cycle, and the phones are a huge part of that. But what people don't really understand about dopamine is they think dopamine is the reward neurotransmitter, and really it's much more of the motivating neurotransmitter. The reward is designed to wire us to do the work, because as like Paleolithic man, we didn't have all these conveniences. And so we needed to have an incentive to do the really hard things because we had to survive. And that is part of, the role of dopamine. And right now, I think we look at dopamine much more in terms of, on the other side of it, in terms of the reward, and we're constantly chasing the high like you would any drug. But really, it's much stronger role is motivating to do work. So
there's a really wonderful educator. His name is Andrew Huberman. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's great.
Okay.
Like I refer to him in the book, but this guy he's a neurobiologist out of Stanford University.
Okay.
This guy does really great podcasts, and he does this whole thing about dopamine. And he says the problem is dopamine, and like you said, is all part of process.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the final reward. He said, and he uses the example of let's say when it comes to athletics,
mm-hmm.
it's the process of working down the field more than the touchdown itself.
Yeah.
The touchdown is great, but you don't go crazy over the process of actually scoring the touchdown. You go crazy over the process of the drive moving down the field.
Yeah.
But again, Courtney, this guy Andrew Huberman is a real special guy.
Okay.
Get a chance to look him up. Yeah, he's all over the place.
Okay.
Actually, it's funny. In watching the internet, you sort of say, what do you mean you've never heard of so-and-so? And like there are times I say to people, well, have you ever heard of Jordan Peterson? No, who's he? I said, what? but you realize there are all sorts of different worlds out there, and then people are into their stuff, and you need the input from other people. And and as a matter of fact, what it talks about is serotonin is more of the serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins are the culmination of dopamine.
Totally. Yep. Yeah. They're the result, much more so.
And there's an important interplay between the two. But what was interesting in writing the book, I realized how complicated these hormones of happiness are, because everything has side effects. I sort of right at the beginning of the chapter, I say, but the importance of this stuff is way beyond the scope of this book. Mm-hmm. It's so complicated to really start to say what's going on in here.
Sure.
But what I did is that when I was saying to you before about this understanding that there's a parallel I'm finding between happiness and loneliness.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, basically, when I look at loneliness, the imagery I give, I talk about it as being a light gauge and an emotional fuel tank.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's all about from where do we get social energy?
Mm-hmm.
And because of this whole idea of social energy. Now, again, when I look at happiness, mm-hmm. I don't look at happiness as a state of being. I look at it as a state of energy. And sure. Happiness is more a matter of having the energy to do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I was just saying to somebody that I realize how many happy people do you know who are really lonely? So all of the factors that contribute mm-hmm. to happiness lend themselves to things that are involved in fighting loneliness. It's like using this analogy of an emotional fuel gauge.
Mm-hmm.
So the red light's going to go on here, but mm-hmm. the whole idea is how do you keep the fuel monitor up? How do you keep it fully engaged?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want it to slide down to so that the light goes on. And a lot of that thing, what do you have to do to make you happy? And you realize, and again, I don't have to tell you this, we're all responsible for our own happiness. And nobody's going to make us happy.
No.
we're all somebody can do is create an environment that somebody's going to help you find happiness for yourself, and you can do all you want in the world, but if a person's not going to put the work into work on their happiness, they're not going to find it. And it's
Yeah.
the same type of thing of realizing and getting over loneliness.
Yeah.
Like, make me unlonely. Like, like what? Like, it's like somebody make me happy,
Right.
make me unlonely. It's a ridiculous,
Right. Yeah.
it's a ridiculous statement.
Ridiculous. Yeah. It's absurd. I like the way that you describe it, because I also think happiness is it's fleeting, it's transitory. I think that's part of the problem too, is that people are constantly looking to something that they can hold on to, and they don't realize that, it's always a constant work in progress. We're always in a state of flux, just like all of the biological mechanics, internally. So are the emotional states. They're very fluid, and they do require work. It's a constant work. So because we're constantly evolving, and our environments are constantly evolving and changing. And
Another guy I've learned a lot from is this guy named Tony Schwartz, who has this industry called the Energy Project. And he talks about there's an interplay of energies in our body. There's a psychic, spiritual, emotional, and mental, and kinetic. And it's an interplay of these four different aspects of where do we draw energy.
Totally.
And it's funny, I haven't read the book. It's funny that my book is coming out at the same time as Tony Robbins' new book. And again, I think Tony Robbins' book is all about energy.
Oh,
where do we get energy from? Well, I think he'll sell a few more than me, but whether or not the content is
never know. You never know.
Never know. But again, it's when it really occurred to me, how many people do you know who are generally happy are lonely? Now, it isn't to say that this is not to say it's good to spend a lot of time by ourselves. And one of the things that we have to realize that we are going to spend a lot of time by ourselves. But it's a question of how do we manage our time by ourselves, and again, what are we doing with that time? If I spent a lot of time by myself creating this book, but that wasn't lonely time. I wasn't lonely while I was doing it. I was engaged in something in a purpose higher than myself.
Totally.
Being lonely is when you need somebody to sort of help you fill that gap.
Right.
With this John Cacioppo, his wife, is also came up with a line that sort of prompted me to write one of the chapters. It's called The Continuum from Loneliness to Love. That as much as we are concerned about the getting rid of our own loneliness, what we should be doing is going the complete opposite way. And what can we be doing to bring more love into the world?
I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful.
And, it's funny because one of the ideas I came up with was, when we are lonely, one of the ways that Cacioppo explained how loneliness probably developed back in the caveman days, when somebody would be separated from the hunt. And all of a sudden you're worried about being attacked by a predator.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I feel lonely because there can be a sense of impending doom.
Sure. Yeah.
If you're separated from the tribe.
Right.
So you look at on the loneliness, it's afraid of being eaten by a predator. What's the polar opposite? Creation of life.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
So you go from, so you have this, and so doing things that bring more love into the world is the opposite of living in a life where you're going to possibly have impending death.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
And that's why when people when they pass away, they say, I don't want to be alone when I die.
Yeah. Yeah. You hear that all the time.
Yeah. And that was one of the things about my mother died during COVID. And like I was only allowed to visit her in the last 2 hours between when they knew that she was on her way out. So for
cool.
the last 5 days of her life,
yeah,
she was by herself. And
yeah.
it was only when I had like a Zoom call with her one day. Great.
Uh-huh.
But I remember my mother always said, David, I just don't want to die alone. No, thankfully I was in the room when she passed away. But whether or not she knew I was there, maybe she was already gone.
I'm sorry.
It's funny, believe it or not, she passed away on my 65th birthday.
Wow.
It was interesting, but and again, people we're social creatures.
Sure, of course. That brings me to my next question about, so you talk about loneliness and and where energy is derived. Do you think there is a difference for introverts and extroverts and how they navigate whether they feel more loneliness, less loneliness, and how they would go about what coping strategies to combat it? Would it be different?
I think they're just different personality types. That a person could be an introvert. It's funny. A person could be an introvert, happy.
Sure, absolutely.
When they're by themselves. So where they get that inner satisfaction, whereas other people may be much more extrovert, they need that affirmation of the society.
Right.
Maybe, and I like everything is, I think it's probably a continuum. That certain people, like again, how do people define themselves? Well, we define ourselves by our own integrity. We also define ourselves by how we're received by the public. We define ourselves by how we're received by the people who love us. And it must be interesting when you hear about these cases of these public figures who have a terrible home life. Yeah.
It happens a lot. A lot of them do.
And again, but you make an interesting point that in terms of it, you'd like to think that the people have balances in their life. The difference between an introvert and an extrovert, what are they doing with their time? Yeah.
Well, I mean, so much of, being introverted versus extroverted has a lot to do with where they're stimulated, so where that energy is derived. And but you can very much be an introvert and be happy, with your alone time and need that alone time, and still feel very lonely. And the converse is true as well. You can be an extrovert and be constantly around people, and even though you are energized by that, you still feel very lonely. You can feel lonely in a crowd. That's not. Yeah. It's about the substance of it. Yeah.
Sorry?
I said it's about the substance of that time. It's about the substance of the time, not the.
Okay. No, but I think what happens for a lot of people, they're afraid to make themselves vulnerable.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's a question of levels of safety.
Yeah.
That people, but if you want to grow, you got to make yourself vulnerable. And it's not, in all honesty, one of the, I've lived a very safe life. And in certain ways, I know that writing this book is putting my ideas out there and sort of, let's see if I can grow. If I just wanted to be a captain in my own home, I could have been, or within my own home, I'm not the captain because my politics generally tend to be more conservative than most people. But so I don't apologize for it. As a matter of fact, this is one of the reasons why having a friendship with you is important because I can be surrounded by a bunch of people who still want to walk around with their masks on. And I'm saying, is this nuts? And I need some sane Americans to say, David, you're not crazy.
You're not crazy. You're not crazy. No. These people who are so afraid of dying, they've forgotten to live.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, actually, one of the good line I came up with, I said, does anybody want to have their tombstone say he was a slave to his fears?
Yeah. No, that's so profound. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I was terrified to start this,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But look where you are, and look how you've taken it up, and look at all the people that you've met.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, and then you've networked to people, and you sort of say, okay, the fact that you can interview a Dr. Malone and sort of say, look at this big macher in this world, and I realize I'm on your opinions are simpatico with somebody who you really respect.
Yeah.
You say, okay, fine. I'm not crazy.
Nope. No. Not crazy at all. Not crazy at all.
But then the thing is that very often you're afraid to speak up. Because I think one of the one of my issues is I've never stood up for myself like I should. I tend to anything to avoid conflict. Anything to avoid conflict. But then again, one of Jordan Peterson's line is that you should be terrified of the consequences of not speaking your piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is this whole thing about free speech.
Yeah.
Going on in the world right now, I'm realizing, hey, this is you have the right to express your opinion, and nobody's going to tell me that I don't even say anything. Like, can you imagine what it must be like for people living in Russia? So we as Canadians, in all honesty, with what was going on last month, is that my view is that I was totally behind the truckers. And people say, oh, David, don't you realize they're a bunch of anti-Semites? You know what? Don't give me a break. They're not a bunch of anti-Semites. They're hardworking individuals. Are there going to be anti-Semites among them? They says, yeah, but you know what? There are anti-Semites on the left too.
Of course.
But I was afraid, I know that if I was to say something that someone in the government may not agree with, all of a sudden my dental practice is going to get audited by somebody. Where all of a sudden I'm going to have my tax audit done. And it's very scary. And
scary.
And it's the whole worry about people abusing power.
Yeah.
That is like the number one thing. And see, one of the things I love about the United States is that they recognize they don't trust people in positions of power.
Unfortunately, that sentiment is not nearly as strong as I would like it to be. But, it is waning, but it is absolutely the founding tenets of our, the United States of America. Absolutely. And there is still very strong bulwark of that. Yeah.
And see, Canadians have a very, the way I describe the Canadians' relationship with the Americans is like having an obnoxious big brother.
Yes.
Brother.
That I concur. Absolutely. I can totally see that.
Even though you admire him, he drives you crazy, he is your brother. But he can sometimes really be obnoxious. Like one of the introductions I have is that as a Canadian, you ask most Canadians to define themselves as what it means to be a Canadian. They say, I don't know, I just know I'm not American. Whereas Americans tend to have a much more positive identity. You guys were protesting against Britain.
Yeah.
And we said, we like the Queen.
Yeah, well, you're a commonwealth of the Queen. So, yeah.
Whereas America, what we were saying before about this whole thing about the individual.
That came to my mind too. Exactly. Yeah. That was exactly what ran through my head.
And it's the energy of the individual, and you don't want individual initiative to be sucked.
No.
Have you ever heard of George Gilder?
No.
Okay, he's a very interesting man. You could look up. He wrote many years ago a book called The Israel Test. And he made a very interesting comment about a country, as much as it has to protect those who are least able to defend themselves, it also has to provide the environment for the people who are the most successful to absolutely flourish and reach their potential.
Yeah.
But George Gilder is another name. Courtney, I'm so happy I'm able to give you these names of these people who have really had a profound influence, whether or not one or two lines, or just know that whenever they speak up, I sort of pay attention.
Yeah.
So this is one of the reasons for writing the book is I want to save my kids time. Like if I learned a lesson when I'm 55,
yeah,
and my kid is 15, let me tell them it right now. So maybe instead of learning it at 55, they'll get it at 35. I will save them 20 years of life.
Amazing. Yeah. That's
there's all this wisdom out there. And it's like, why not take it in? Why are you wasting your time? And Charlie, I promise you, you're going to learn this. But your dad, you're an old fuddy-duddy and forget it. But Charlie, I promise you, this is a life lesson you are going to learn.
Yeah. And this goes back to humans learning by proxy, right?
Yeah.
So if we can learn the lessons of others, then we don't have to incur those consequences ourselves. We can move on to other mistakes that we can make personally.
It's interesting with what you said, because what I've often thought is that the importance of mentors. See, with our relationship with our parents, there's this give and take with the parent. Like I've often said, everybody goes through a rebellious stage.
Sure.
You rebel against authority figures.
Right.
Who's the number one authority figure? Is our parent.
Father.
Okay. And so as much as you want the love and respect of your parent, you're also rebelling against your parent. But there are times when you're not going to listen to your parent because they're your parent. Like I remember the example I used to use is when I was single. Let's say my mother met a woman that she think I should go out with, and I'd say, "Ma, thanks." But if a male friend would recommend the exact same woman, I would go. But because it's my mother, I wasn't going to go.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that's the reason why it's important to find mentors, that you have somebody who you can be learning from, and they have a slightly detached emotional relationship with you. But again, like what they have no power over you, whereas a parent can sometimes abuse their power over their children. So it's a very interesting dynamic, and there's this one chapter in the book where you surround yourself with people who want the best for you. And there's a list, there's like again, social energies. I have like 10 different types of social energies that you should be, that you could be looking for. And every individual has you have a peer, you have a friend, you have a lover, you have a religion, you have a coach, you have a mentor, you have like all of these different people sort of give you a different type of energy. And you got to realize that you're going to be getting a different type of social energy from each of them. Like you don't want to just get a energy from a cheerleader.
Right. We need those too, but yeah.
That's right. You need those too. But on the other hand, you need it. Everybody gives, like it's basically a blend.
Yeah.
And people want
the
a full
ecosystem, right?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, it's the ecosystem.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, you had said something about how the art of communication has regressed as a result of smartphones. And I'm curious if you can expound on that, because I think I understand what you're saying. And I think in some ways there's parts of it that's actually been enhanced, and there's parts of it that have deteriorated. And so I'm really curious your thoughts, but I'll share briefly just, what I mean by that is, so people do spend a lot more times texting, than they did previously. And so there is an art to that. And there is an element of having to refine your what it is you're trying to say and distill it into something that's condensed, like a tweet or a response on a thread, regardless of what social media platform it may be, or a quick text that you're writing, whether it be to a friend or to colleagues. So I think there is an element of communication. There's also an element of communicating with others who are not close to you. They may be strangers. They may be across the globe. And so in that regard, I think there is an element of communication that has actually been enhanced. But then there's also, of course, the aspect of, people don't read much anymore. People are not in person forced to defend themselves. So what somebody would say on a social media platform is, not necessarily what they would have the courage to say if they were looking somebody in the eye. So yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts were, what you meant by all that.
Well, listen, I think the internet is like the greatest invention since the printing press.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like the opening line of the introduction is the human capacity for perverting the beautiful is endless.
Yeah.
That's a Dennis
So
Prager
profound.
line. That's a Dennis Prager line that, yeah. And so you have to appreciate that. And you say, what's the downside? And like this is wonderful. You're 1,000 miles away from me. I'm really connecting with you. I'd like to be able to give you a hug at the end of this conversation. I'm like, Courtney, that was a lot of fun.
Right. Yeah.
Give me a hug. Give me a hug.
Yeah.
And it's like we're physical beings.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, we're physical beings, and to deny that
Mm-hmm.
is. Are you? It's taking away part of our humanity, and
Yeah.
you realize that every single medium has its good things. Every single media has its bad things. Listen, as much as I've been saying about smartphones are terrible, I think every single older person should be every single person in a retirement home should have a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
And if they need a smartphone, let them have it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they've been the worst thing that's happened is older people who haven't been able to see grandchildren. Like the basic or like the basic human need of just talking and again the image that I leave the book with is the final image of the movie Field of Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
When Kevin Costner says, "Hey Dad, do you want to have a catch?"
Mm-hmm.
And I realized they're not even talking to each other. They're just throwing a ball.
Yeah. Something very profound about that. Yeah.
There's just the give and take of, Dad, we're having a nonverbal conversation. We're throwing each other a damn baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell there's no place in the world that he would rather be at that moment.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because every single time I see the scene, I bawl my eyes out. And what was really funny, and again, I had a really good relationship with my father. Mm-hmm. But every single time I realized, oh my God, it could have been so much better. And then when I cry over it now, it's like I realize, well, it's not just about my relationship with my father, it's about my relationship with my sons. I want to have, let's play catch with my sons.
Yeah.
But people are so, they don't know how to manage it. And they look at all of these different ways of communicating, and they don't have it in their own life. And because they don't have it in their own life, they either go to a cell phone, or they tear down the institutions where people do have that stuff.
Right.
But again, it's like here I've written this 20,000 word essay, and ultimately it's like, well, have a conversation. the importance of having a conversation and who do you want to play catch with? Thank you very much. You don't have to read the book. Or you know what I mean? It's like, this is the main takeaway from the whole idea. I realize it's a simple message of loneliness. Who do you want to play catch with? Why aren't you playing catch with that person? What has gone on in the society that is preventing you from playing catch? What are your distractions?
Mm-hmm.
What are you being? What are you concerned about? What do you think is important? Don't avoid difficult conversations. People are afraid of getting hurt. People are afraid of difficult conversations. People don't want to work at it. But again, having a difficult conversation with somebody with the possibility that this may lead to something that is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But that's the process of growth.
Right. Yeah.
And most of us don't want to grow.
You talked about, how we're physical beings and the importance of, like physical training. And this is one of the things I address all the time in my speeches about movement being a metaphor for life, is how, movement is a teacher to teach you how to overcome adversity. But it's when you're talking about growth, any athlete understands that it's through the struggle. No matter how much talent you have, I always say, like, no matter how much talent you have, you're not going to go to the Olympics sitting on the couch. You could have all the talent in the world, but every athlete knows that it's through that struggle that growth happens, that, they're able to, whatever skill it is, whether it's just sheer strength, but it comes through the struggle. And when you're talking about the art of conversation, I think it's very similar. We are, in some ways, this is my thought, I think in some ways the technology has created, it's created a barrier, but it's also a protection. When I was saying how people who respond to things on social media, they say things they would never say if they could look that person in the eye and say them. And it's because they feel safe. And so, they have the illusion of safety, which doesn't do them a service in the long haul, because then you don't learn how to articulate yourself, when things are unclear, when things are, precarious. And it is through that discovery process. Again, it's the discovery process. But I think because we're social beings, there's a discovery process that you go through with another person, whether you agree with them, you disagree with them, they illuminate something that will either make you reinforce what it is you already thought and give you a deeper sense of why you believe that or why that's important to you, or they'll shine light on something you didn't realize before. So there's a huge growth that can be had, and that's a discourse and a dialogue that can't really be had by yourself. To some degree you can, which I'm sure you can speak to in the process of writing and, writing your books. And certainly, now in this medium of talking to, doing videos, there is an element of that, but it's not the same as getting that feedback from another human being.
Yeah. Well, it's really funny that right now I'm looking at you on a screen. Mm-hmm. And I am looking at you directly in your eyes.
Yeah.
If we were in each other's company right now, I would not be able to hold by looking in your eyes. And this is something that just occurred to me now, because this is what's going on in my listening to you. I'm really focused on what you're saying, and I'm looking you directly in the eyes. But if you were talking to me live, I'd probably be looking away, because the power of the soul of missing there's an essence of missing in not being in the presence of the other person. And so there's this whole thing, I love the biblical themes. Hineni, here I am, here I am, here I am. And it's all about being present. And what are the things that are preventing us from being truly present? And you're right, there's a certain amount of safety in distance. It's confession time. A lot of the women that I had crushes on did not live in Toronto. Because there was a certain safety of not dealing with them every day,
Right.
and being able to maintain these crushes because
Mm-hmm.
they would have a fantasy about their existence
Sure.
as opposed to realize seeing them every day and dealing with the fact that, oh my God, she's as flawed as I am, or maybe she's not as perfect as I thought she was. But there's a safety to it.
I would add to that, there is also the vulnerability, because as much as we build up the fantasy of the other person, we also have, the facade that we put consciously or unconsciously, and this is not, to denigrate anybody for doing this. This is human, but we have the face that we want to put forward and that we want to be accepted. And when you are intimate with someone, and that can only happen with, constant, close proximity. When you're intimate, you're very vulnerable and you're seen, you're seen and you're exposed. And I think there's an element of that is very scary to a lot of people. It's not safe. It's the antithesis of safe.
That's right. But if you want to grow, it's like, getting back to this with what's gone on with COVID,
Yeah.
I'm saying to people, when are you going to come out of Egypt?
Yeah. Right.
I can't tell you. I felt there's this biblical character called Nachshon. Have you ever heard of Nachshon?
No.
Okay, when supposedly when the Hebrews made it to the sea, nobody was going into the water, and there was this one guy named Nachshon who just started to walk.
Okay.
And it was only when he was up to his neck in water that the seas parted.
Wow.
And I feel like dealing with a lot of people, it's like, when are you going to come out of Egypt?
Mm-hmm. Right.
But you can't say that like I'd like to. Because, again, listen, at my synagogue, they stuffed the shofar they covered the shofar with a mask to blow the shofar.
What? So wait, say that again.
When they blew the shofar.
Yeah.
This year.
Yeah.
They covered the exit of the shofar with either a sock or they put like a mask over a cloth over the end of it. Because
Why?
they were afraid of spreading COVID germs.
No. Wow.
Courtney, would I lie to you about this?
No, I don't think you would, but it's kind of incredible.
That's how paranoid people were, and they didn't want to make themselves vulnerable to the possibility that, I said they could have said the guy who's blowing the shofar, send him to the mikveh, give him a dose of Listerine.
Yeah.
And let him blow the shofar.
Seriously.
I felt like telling them that, go outside, just don't cover the shofar.
Right.
But that's what they chose to do. And it's funny, my synagogue's been wonderful to me throughout the past few years.
Okay.
But it's like they really fell in my eye.
Yeah.
Over that one little life, but you'd be surprised at how many people completely bought into it.
Well, I mean, it's just, to me, it illuminates the corruption of, so many institutions. There's no science to support it. They keep saying, trust the science. There's no science. This isn't science. If anything, the science has shown that that does more harm than good. That they're not protecting you. Yeah. And in many cases, they're actually doing more harm, and they on many levels, on certainly the psychological and sociological. We've already talked about that. But even physiologically, they do great harm. So yeah, so it's very disconcerting to see that. And it's especially disconcerting to see that in a place of worship, because, that's where it's supposed to be the spiritual connection, right? and let people do what, resonates with them, with, their personal covenant. That's the whole purpose behind it, and the religious institution is just supposed to be an extension, providing the community to do that, to honor that.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be, the messaging necessarily, it's messaging isn't the right word, but it's not, I really wouldn't want to say it's not supposed to be forced. It's, this is your time to share that spiritual bond. So
just something that really drove me crazy. And another thing about the mask that bothers me is that our individuality has been taken away.
Of course.
And this is where it fosters loneliness.
Yes.
Because it's like all of a sudden you can't see another person smile.
Yeah. And identity is stripped.
I'm sorry?
Right? The identity is stripped. You become a non-person character. You can't see emotions, and
That's right. Or all of a sudden I fit into the narrative of what's going on in the world. I'm no longer David Burstein. I'm a white male.
Right. Exactly.
And it's just nuts. And there was a line I came up with. I said, to see a person's face without seeing them smile is like hearing the sound of one hand clapping.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And I can't tell you how often I referred to the dilemmas that you went through with having to wear masks, because of your vision was cut down by a third.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for a completely sighted person, it's a sixth.
Yep.
And it's like, excuse me, what about Courtenay's rights to be able to be heard and to see? It's like, oh, geez, I never thought about it that. And it's like all of a sudden, yeah. Or like right now, I feel like saying to anybody who make an issue over the fact that I don't want to be masked, listen, if it bothers you so much, how about I don't have to wear a mask and you can wear two?
Yeah, exactly. You do you,
You do you.
Yep.
Like all of a sudden they're so concerned about everybody else's health. Well, you know what? Be concerned about your own health. I'll take my chances. I know, for example, in being a dentist, I wear a mask all day long.
Yeah. And
I have to wear it all day long. And then I'm not supposed to take it off in between patients, or I'm supposed to wear an N95 mask. I get a headache if I wear an N95 mask for more than 2 minutes.
Of course.
The
oxygen deprivation.
Yeah, like there's a famous Groucho Marx thing that, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?
Right, exactly.
Like I can't breathe. And I remember making a joke about when George Floyd passed away, when he was murdered. I can't breathe. Well, guess what? 250 million people can't breathe either. Mm-hmm. And obviously I wasn't trying to show a moral equivalence between, but I was saying, I can't breathe with an N95.
Yeah, I know. It causes physiological damage. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's shown the oxygen reduction.
That's right. And then the same people who tell us to believe in greenhouse gases don't want to give legitimacy to the fact of rebreathing recycled air.
Yes, exactly. And you're breathing in toxins. I won't say this now, and I'll spare people my crude analogy, but it is one of the ways that we excrete waste. And you're now asking us to, breathe that back in. That's gross. And it's not safe. It's not beneficial to our health.
I don't know about you. At the end of the day, I'm exhausted.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, for me, it was giving me chalazions in my eye, on the eye I see.
Never heard of that word, chalazion?
Chalazion. So it's similar to a sty. A sty would be like a pimple, usually on the like outer edge of the lid. A chalazion is typically the upper lid, and it's usually inside. So it's a little bit deeper. Yeah. It's a pimple essentially, but but I was getting them, and I was getting them in the eye I see out of. So it was really, really concerning for me. I, that eye it's everything for me, so I want to protect it. And if there's any obstruction, that's, further reduces my peripheral vision, which is already, as you noted, it's limited. So that was really, really an issue for me.
Yeah. And they, God forbid, they would have respect for you, because it would also drove me crazy. All of a sudden, everybody became a capo. Everybody would say, "Hey, could you put your mask on? Put your mask on. Put your mask on." And right now, my kid's principal, it's like that's the only thing she says all day long. Put your mask on. And you want to say to somebody, you know what? Well, you don't, like, again, I'll spare the and the thing is it's not worth the argument.
Right. Well, I think it is worth the argument. So this is really, as we were talking before about people speaking out, and the reason why freedom of speech is so important is because, otherwise you're fed one narrative. And, I do this on my podcast. Now, granted, a lot of people tend to be on, the right side of the spectrum, but I bring on voices that, are very varied. And I don't always agree with everything that somebody says. I'll never, we were talking about this before we jumped on. I'll never agree with 100% of anything anybody says, no matter how much I respect or, like them, or really am aligned with their views and values and perspectives. I'm never going to agree with everything anyone says. But it's so important that people don't engage in autocritique. That's what happened in the struggle sessions, Mao's struggle sessions. They had censored them to the point where people began to censor themselves. And I think it is so essential. And so I just think it's tantamount. It's like, paramount that people today speak out, and that they don't accept any tyranny, because we saw what happened. And 2 weeks becomes 2 years, a mask becomes injections. It's always, it's never the end. The goalpost always gets moved. And so it's really important for people that I, in the very beginning, said, I do not stand with this. To me, this is not okay on so many levels. To me, it was just, it didn't make any sense at all. And I felt that it was dangerous, and it was something I was going to speak out against. So I think the argument is worth it. If more people argue against it, we may not.
I'm getting more. It's taken me 66 years to get more courageous, but it's better late than ever. Because again, I think that there's a real, in Canada, we have much more fear of government. No, excuse me. We have much more acceptance of government.
Sure.
That if we dare speak out, somebody's going to make your life miserable.
Right. Yeah, I understand that. I definitely think that sentiment is true. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's troubling. It's really troubling, because again, maybe part of what has gone on. I've never been one to know how to argue with people, or I wanted to avoid conflict. So I bit my tongue. But what ends up happening, you bite your tongue, like there's this idea in shalom bite, for the sake of the peace in the home. Right. Peace in the home. But you know what? If your thoughts continually get ignored, there comes a point saying, okay, fine, I can't take this anymore.
Right.
And that's why people leave.
Yep. Exactly. Do you think that some of this, censorship, both externally and internally, contributes to loneliness?
I'm sure it can. It's a question of being able to because it sucks energy. It sucks our ability for our own energy to express itself.
Yep.
Or people are overregulated. that you get frustrated, that you're not, that I think a big part of life is trying to reach our potential.
Yes.
Very basic idea. And is this preventing me from being afraid to speak out? This is stifling an idea.
Yeah. And I think that it's also blocks intimacy, because how can you truly be vulnerable if
Right.
you're constantly being censored, whether you're censoring yourself or, others.
And then it's a question of who do you really want to reveal yourself? Like, listen, in my writing the book, I still realize that there's things I don't trust too many people with.
Sure. Yeah. And that's not a bad thing. There are lots of people who shouldn't be trusted with a lot of things. So
that's a good point. Or what's interesting is that I'll open up to a group of men. I'm in a team. There's an organization I belong to called MDI, Mentorship, Discover, and Inspire. And when we have our team meetings, very often we discuss things that I wouldn't necessarily discuss with a spouse, or even with a close friend. You sort of need that distance,
right.
Or like, why do so many people go to psychiatrists?
Yeah.
They need somebody to talk about.
Yeah.
They need somebody to talk to. Excuse me.
Yeah, they need something. Yeah. Talk to.
And it's really funny because we all have these. We all have shadow energy within us, and most people don't know how to confront. The same way we don't want to confront the predators and being lonely on the outside world. A lot of us don't want to confront the predator, our inner dragons.
Sure.
Because it was one of the great things that it's doing the research for the book. I found a lot of good stuff, and see, a dragon doesn't exist literally. They do exist figuratively. Like, where did the idea of a dragon, where does it come from? They don't exist, but they do exist. And knowing how to deal with those inner dragons is a big challenge. And there's a lot of loneliness in really confronting mistakes that, let's say, I've made my whole life. Oh my God, I'm trying to confront this. I'm not dealing with it. Right. And then ultimately I'm not knowing myself.
Right.
And in a big part of
the parts of yourself from yourself. Yeah.
That's right. Most people really don't like, what do I really think about this? And it's when you're able to give clarity to what you believe in.
Right.
Oh, then all of a sudden they have a purpose. Oh, this is what, at the end of the day, this is what is important to me. But for a lot of people, they don't want to confront. Confront yourself to your inner vulnerabilities.
Right.
Because a lot of us are afraid of what we're going to see, but instead of being afraid of what we're going to see, we don't see it, but then we sweep it under the rug.
Right.
Again,
it's still there.
It's still there. It's not going to go away.
Yeah. When you say like the dragons within, what does that mean to you?
What are those aspects of my life that I'm still not dealing with? Whatever they may be. There could be for some people, maybe a childhood experience. For other people, it could be doing something unethical. Sometimes it could be a rationalization I use for not taking on a certain action that undermined my own integrity. It could be any, but we all have a dark side. That I remember when Jordan, excuse me. Jordan Peterson did this whole thing about people coming back from war about suffering PTSD,
Right.
and it wasn't about what they witnessed.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what they realized that they were capable of doing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And so there's a loneliness, and like and is this person going to still love me if I admit that I had a desire to actually kill an innocent child? Or even the thought
Right.
exists, and then people don't know how to handle that.
Right.
And so there's a certain amount of loneliness, and who do you want to trust, and who are you going to open up to?
Right.
And again, there's not necessarily one person who you're going to like, you'll open up to a certain person in a certain time, because you can feel that this is someone you can trust.
Right.
That you're willing to I'm willing to open up to this person. I have affection for another person, but I'm not quite feeling they're going to get it.
Yeah.
Same way, I'm willing to open up to this person. Again, this is why people probably go to psychiatrists, because they have these deep-seated things in their life that they haven't properly dealt with, and it's just nagging.
Right.
Or things, and again, things, whether or not it's a personal behavior thing or it's a personal tragedy. I tell this brief story in the book about a patient of mine. She was in her 70s when she found out she had cancer, and she realized she ended up going into depression and had to be hospitalized. And then she realized one of the reasons why she was of the depression is that when her parents and her brother died, and within 3 years, when she was in her 20s, she didn't properly deal with her grief.
Wow. Wow.
Okay, so again, there's these energies. I'm not necessarily saying, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative, a negative action.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been something that wasn't properly dealt with.
Right. It's interesting. I mean, Chinese medicine talks a lot about that. They always, for thousands of years, and they say, whatever physical manifestation is the result of something that, internal. And by the time it manifests like physiologically, that's really kind of that's the end of the rope.
Yeah.
So that it's been usually harboring for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And I think given the, very complex interweavings of human beings, I think that makes a lot of sense. We're very, very complex.
No. It goes both ways. Like, I'm convinced that part of some physical stuff, physical stuff and being a dentist, the stress of being a dentist has affected my head. And my head has affected my body. The stress of my body, like, all of a sudden, it's like you're like this all day long, and then all of a sudden, I'm supposed to be able to stretch out.
All right.
40 years of doing this.
Yeah.
And the stress of it goes both ways.
Totally.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the thing that really strikes me when you talk about loneliness is that it's whatever's blocking intimacy. And I think there is an element of, what we've kind of alluded to it throughout this conversation, but this lack of ability for people to be vulnerable. And I think that's really kind of the crux of it. You can't have intimacy without vulnerability, and you can't have if you don't have intimacy, you're going to be lonely.
And smartphones are making the wall that much thicker.
Yes.
Because instead of I guess a couple, they're lying in bed at night, and instead of having a conversation, they're letting themselves be distracted by what they're watching on their cell phone.
Right.
Or the whole thing about being at a dinner table.
Yeah. Right.
They're just not dealing with the potential depth of a conversation. And again, like these, I guess smartphones are depth killers, and people want to feel bonded.
Yes.
And this, they're tools of distraction.
Yes. Yes. Definitely tools of distraction.
And that's the, I think at the end of the day, if you had to really nail it down as to what the problem with smartphones,
Yeah.
they're tools of distraction.
Yeah. I think that sounds right. Yeah.
Nicholas Carr wrote the book The Shallows many years ago, and he said he said that you used to have a television over here, you had this stereo over here, had your audio player here, you had this thing, and now with the concentration of distraction technologies, I think he described it as. That it's here. It's like what I could play a game, I could listen to music, I could watch television, I could have a conversation, or I could be concentrated on Courtenay Turner right now.
Right. Yeah.
And it's I think, like, again, are you familiar with Jim Kwik at all?
No, all these people. Wow.
Jim Kwik is great. He's this Chinese American
guy.
guy.
The library to go look up now.
Oh no, he's great. He wrote a book called Limitless. And what it was,
Oh, I know Limitless. Okay, I just didn't know the name. Yeah,
okay.
I know that book. Yeah, I read that book.
Okay, so he has that book is part of my shelf improvement, not my self-improvement. Shelf improvement.
Shelf improvement.
But that's a line. That's a line of Jim Kwik, and he has this thing about. He calls it the 4 Ds: distraction, deluge, distraction, dementia, and deduction. We're totally overwhelmed by the amount of information. We're too easily distracted. We're not using our brains, and the computers are thinking for us.
Yep.
And like the example of we're not using our brains, how many phone numbers do you remember?
And that one kills me. As a kid, if I heard number once, I remembered it.
Yeah.
Like, always, you heard number. Oh yeah, remember it. Now it's like I have to look just to remember like 4 numbers. It's pathetic.
Yeah. No, but the whole the technology is great. I'm sure you saw that line by Neil Postman. Don't think scientific. Don't what is it? Scientific advancement, technological advancement is great, but it doesn't represent the highest form of human achievement.
Yeah.
Don't worship technology.
Right.
Don't worship it. How can I use this to do something easier, faster, and better?
Yeah.
Great, but it's not going to be a substitute for getting a hug from another human being.
Totally. Yeah. And the line from Dennis Prager is really profound also, that anything that can be used for good can be weaponized as well. So, there's a lot of beauty in technology, and it can absolutely be used for tremendous good, but it can also do a lot of harm. So.
The example when I said sex and religion. Okay, next topic. When it comes to perverting the beautiful.
Right.
It's all basic. But the stuff in the book, what I do is I go through some basic ideas, but at the end of the day, I try to do things to sort of get people to start having conversation. Yeah. And just the act of the conversation, like right now, I'm very happy that we're having a record of this conversation. Now, am I going to look back on it and say, oh, it was when Courtenay said this that I really had a good time? Well, you know what I mean? It's just it's the process of the schmooze.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And again, like the sanctity of the conversation.
Yeah.
Is my biggest takeaway. And again, also learning listening skills. And Jim Kwik has this acronym. He says, if you notice, the word silent is an acronym for listen.
Yeah.
Scramble the letters.
Yeah. Not that's not acronym. That's
Well,
an homonym, is it?
I don't know if it's,
Yeah.
no, it's not. It's an anagram.
Anagram. That's it. Yeah. Anagram. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Which is a very interesting thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Just, and again, to be present for others, listen for others, listen for another person's greatness.
So I'm curious, I have as far as like, engaging the conversation, I noticed in your book, you have like pages for people to write. So in a way that's beginning the conversation with themselves. Do you think there's an element of, importance in that can, hone and develop the conversation skills to then take with others?
Absolutely. It's funny. My editor needed to stretch out the book.
Okay.
They're just like I guess when in the publishing industry, they want books to be a certain number of pages.
Right, yeah.
So she stretched out the book by giving each of those questions a lot more space than I originally intended to have, which is, okay, thank you. I appreciate you did that. I'm not going to question that aspect of the book production. But again, people you want depth, you want better questions.
Yeah.
You want people to think. And you want depth and bonding and thinking, well, geez, what do you think about that? And then you get the conversation going. Right. And realize it's the process of the conversation. Like, I'd be great if people would have this book and say, okay, this Friday night, this is the discussion. Right. Or one of the questions I like, why did you pick up this book? Right.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking about the aspect of starting with your own conversation. And, I think so few people do that. You were talking about looking to, external stimuli and validation. And I think so many people do that. And part of why they're lonely is because they haven't started internally. So many people are so concerned with what's going on outside. They've taken very little time to do any self-reflection. And I think that process of learning how to have a conversation with yourself and to ask real difficult questions and to listen, there's something really much more difficult to sit there and listen to yourself than it is to listen to another in some ways, because we can easily just distract with anything and there's nobody watching, so when you're with another person, you have their eyes and their energy on you. So, if nothing else, you feel obligated to pay attention. Not that everybody does, but there is, when you don't have any eyes on you, to really sit there and be present with yourself and listen to yourself. I wonder your thoughts on that, if there's an element of starting there and the power of that, and if that would enhance discourse, between people.
Well, it's interesting. It's a very good question that you're asking. I'm thinking relative to my children. I feel like saying next time I watch them play a game, I say, what are you learning about yourself right now?
Yeah.
As opposed to if they were reading a book. Or actually having a conversation. Again, according to this conversation here is giving me that much more confidence about being able to maintain a conversation with other people because, oh, geez, I'm not as inarticulate as I thought.
No,
I'm capable of this stuff, but I think what happens with a lot of kids, the technology is preventing them from getting to know themselves, because then they think that they are their emotions, but they're not their emotions. You're not your emotions, and you're not your thoughts. There's something higher than that. But I think what happens with the smartphones is that it sort of takes away from your ability to develop your spiritual side.
Yes, there's truth in that. Absolutely. I
in,
agree.
in ways that I don't think that you it's just impossible. Okay, here, God, you're wonderful. God, you're great. No, it's like all of a sudden you realize, you mean there's something higher than my doing Wordle well? I know about you. I've started on Wordle.
I've never played Wordle, but
Wordle is this new game at the New York Times but it's all over. But what it is that it's a 5-letter word. You have to guess the 5-letter word, and what you do is you put a 5-letter word, and then it tells you if you got any of the letters right and if they're in the right location. Then you have to put a series of words, and then you have to figure out what the word is.
All right. Well, it sounds like a fun game, but
yeah, it is.
I would think there's maybe more to life. I don't know.
It's one of those, again, we're so easily distracted.
Yes, and it sounds addictive for sure.
Yeah, that's right. And again, the whole stuff with all of this, I'm not above any of this.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
And if anything, I probably deal with a little bit more cognitive dissonance because I know I'm not doing what I should be.
Mm-hmm.
That I come home after work and I'm exhausted. So what do? I sit and watch TV for a couple of hours when I know I'd probably be better off working out or doing something more productive with my time. So again, I'm not above any of this.
Sure. What do you feel, what were the biggest lessons for you in writing the book? Like, what are the biggest things you learned personally?
About the need to become a better listener. That moment when I realized that scene between Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams, mm-hmm. I said that I get so emotional about that scene.
Right.
Tells me that's ultimately what's important to me. Or there's this one chapter about how do we handle our emotions. Mm-hmm. And the point is that we can't get overwhelmed by our emotions. We have to be able to sit back, right, and say, what is this telling me? And the brief story I tell in the book is that many years ago I was at the gym, and a friend of mine was in the change room, and he was taking his 6-year-old son, mm-hmm. for a swim. Okay. And I saw the two of them together, and a sense of envy came over me. Mm. And I was able to sit back, and I said, whew, where's that coming from? And it's at that moment I realized, David, you want to be a father. So what happens is our emotions are often gateways of it. So it's important of knowing, let's see where this takes me, or why did I feel this way in seeing him taking his son for a swim. Okay, that like we get insights into ourselves. Yeah. And there was another thing happened to me at my son's bar mitzvah. When the third Aliyah was coming up, the rabbi told everybody in the congregation to come up to the bima. So I had all of these people, Charlie and I had all of these, like 100 people around us and I practically had tears in my eyes. And I said, where's that coming from? And I realized, my pride in being Jewish and what the whole moment was all about. You get a sense about yourself, mm-hmm. and then you sort of say, geez, I guess I do have a good soul, or this is what is ultimately important to me. And so I'm not afraid of my emotions as much as I used to be. The fact that I wrote a book,
huge.
it's a huge thing to sort of have the confidence that I have enough to say that I think will sustain the interest of a lot of people. I think I've have certain wisdom over the years that I think people are going to like take out of, they'll read the book, and if they say, oh, that's interesting, they get one idea out of the book, that's huge.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And that it's documented, and like, again, obviously I hope the book is a success.
Of course. Yeah.
But I've been saying to people all along, I said, well, I hope it's not an expensive love letter to my children. but if it is, I wrote it with integrity. There's a lot of interesting ideas. And even if people don't like it, I'm not going to take people too seriously. Prager has this great line. He says, when he gets a compliment, he doesn't let it go to his brain. And when he gets an insult, he doesn't let it go to his heart. And you got to, and again, and like, you know, I'm hope not, if there's a chance that this whole adventure, I could become a public, let's say it becomes a great success. And like all of a sudden, I'm not going to really be worried about what other people, I shouldn't give other people too much power.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sorry, go on.
Or no, I won't want to give people too much power over what they think. I said, I know the process that went into this. We did Lyda and Paul and I did our best to do it. And I think that we've done a good job. Now let's see what happens. Let's hope for the best. And I can, at the end of the day, said again, the process of doing it, is almost as important as the final product.
Yeah.
How you can, like, even a couple of days ago, I just changed a line. It wasn't that big, but it's like Will Smith has this great line. He said, you can't get intimidated by building a building. All you can do is try to lay the perfect brick. Yeah. So little, and again, what you're saying before about dopamine, the dopamine and laying the perfect brick, that is important. And try to enjoy the moment. Yeah. And that's what I'm really coming out of the book, also saying, enjoying the simple pleasures of life. Have gratitude, like all of this, it's all the same. It's all gratitude, happiness, living in the moment, having a good conversation. It's like Courtenay, it's like, I'm not saying anything so profound, yet I'm sort of giving, I guess a lot of the book has to do with presenting obstacles from people being able to do it. Yeah.
I think people have become so, when you're so caught up in something and you're living through it, it's hard to step back and see. So while people intellectually may know that, gratitude and connection and, the importance of all of these things, the process, but, to viscerally own that and to really, fathom what that means is very different. And so I think that's the importance of the work you're doing with laying it out in the book. And also to lay out what those obstacles that are preventing people from achieving those things are.
Yeah, like, and this whole thing about the one thing you hear all the time, indispensable ingredient for happiness is gratitude. Like again, with Serena C's, it's all about gratitude. It's enjoying the moment, counting your blessings every single day. Yeah, count your blessings every single day.
What people don't know about gratitude is that it actually has the power to change you on a cellular level. It literally can change your cellular structure. It also changes your neurochemical structure. So, it's really, really powerful and quite profound. And it's so simple. I tell people often when they're really struggling to start a gratitude journal, and often you'll see your life really turn around.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I have this one person I'm thinking of right now. I won't say because obviously if they see this video.
All right. Yeah.
I feel like saying to them, what are your blessings?
Right. Yeah.
What are your blessings? And again, when you're around people, like a lot of people who are lonely, there's a damn good reason why they're lonely, because they're toxic energy in the world and they're toxic to themselves.
Totally.
And like how, there's, again, it's so funny with how do you become your own best friend?
Right.
And there's nothing, and it's not a bad thing. And there's a section I talk about negative self-talk. Guilty.
I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think you should figure out how to be your own best friend before you expect to be your best friend.
That's right, for sure.
Yeah.
And this whole thing about, the analogy being an oxygen mask in a plane.
Right. Right.
So like all of these trite little sayings from our youth.
Yeah.
Oh, now I understand what Daddy was talking about. Now I understand and you get clarity. And again, one of the things I'm trying to do in the book is sort of make people aware of what do they have to do to soften themselves up, to be the best person they can, to give and to give their best to help somebody else find their potential. So one of the, it's what summing up the book. I've been able to sum up the Bible in two basic ideas. And one of the ideas is they say, let us create man in our image. Now, if God is invisible, what does that mean? Well, you look at the Sabbath. What's the Sabbath all? What are the Jews remembering when they celebrate the Sabbath? God created the world, and God brought the Jews out of Egypt. Okay, so what's the purpose of our life? Be positive, creative, and help take somebody out of what's holding them back from preventing them from being totally free.
Wow.
Okay, so that's my, you know what I mean, Courtney? It's like I've been able to, when you get that idea that we're here to serve other people.
Yeah, but I've never heard it expressed that way.
Yeah, well, I just figured this out in this past year. So I'm very good at making connections. That's one of my specialties in life. And again, the story in the book about the Israeli astronaut that you read about. And all of a sudden I said, oh, it's like a light went off. Oh, that's what they're saying. I tell somebody, okay, like they say, love thy neighbor as thyself. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. That's a basic understanding. And you say, this is what it's all about, or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
It's all basic stuff. And when it was almost like an epiphany to me this past year. I said, oh my God, be creative and be nice and help bring others to freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. I love
simple.
it. Yeah, it's beautiful and so profound.
Yeah, I really, so it was I'm just really happy of the project. And I hope it's successful. And if it isn't, again, like I said, it's an expensive love letter to my kids.
I love that.
But if it isn't success, again, I gave it my best effort.
Yeah.
And I just have to not get upset if it's not as successful as I'd want, because again, ultimately, again, I would like it to be monetarily successful.
Of course, yeah.
But it was a successful project.
Yeah.
Regardless, because I gave it my best effort.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you've garnered so much through the process as well. I mean, I think you've achieved personal validation. You've learned a lot. I think there's tremendous reward, intrinsically in the process.
Yeah. So it was I just wish people would. I tell people to start journals, or like
I wish I had been more of a journaler. Yeah.
Yeah. But
I think
I've been lazy in the last year though,
yeah,
because I just was so preoccupied with the book that
right.
I didn't journal as much as I should have. Maybe I have to start journaling a little bit more.
Yeah, well, that's a good note to me. I'm not a journaler, and I've always thought I really should do that.
Well, you're doing a great service here. I think that every time I listen to any of your podcasts, you bring out the best in people. And the fact that you're doing that, that's as much a gift as anybody else. You're engaging, you ask good questions. You're, like you said in your introduction, you're here to learn, you're fascinated by the bigger stuff. And it's so just know that you're on the right path.
Thank you. I
You're welcome.
appreciate it. I really appreciate that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So,
Well,
oh, by the way, I wanted to show you,
um,
very important.
yes, the cover.
That's the cover of the book.
Lift it up a little bit so you can see the full. Yes, that's it. I love it. Yeah.
So we'll
Great.
see what happens. And my editor wrote a very nice blurb over here. And
Okay.
it's like I have this vision of being able to walk into one of the bookstores and like the leading bookstore in Canada, and
Mhm.
looking at their opening shelves. You walk in, seeing the book like right beside a book of Margaret Atwood or something like that. We'll see David Burstein's book.
Yeah, you maybe do a book signing.
That's right. Well, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, I'm rooting for you, and I can
Well,
see
thank
it
you very
happening.
much.
So
No, this was great.
this was awesome. If you have anything else you want to close out with, let me know.
No,
And I know your website's on the way, so we'll
my
post.
website's on the way, and hopefully the book is going to be coming out April the 12th.
Okay.
The ebook is going to be available before then. There's, again, this is all stuff that I don't know about, pre-sales and getting endorsements and stuff like that. That stuff is coming, but ideally it's going to be out on the 12th.
Okay.
And we'll see what happens. And again, I've had lots of, other than certain friends and relatives, I've had every time anybody hears about it, they're very excited about it, and they look forward to it. So I'm really thinking it's something I'm proud of.
Yeah, so all you should be. I mean,
Yeah.
just the fact you wrote a book is something to be proud of.
Yeah.
You know, no small feat. So yeah, absolutely. So well, as soon as you have the links for, where people can buy the book and whatnot,
Yeah.
I will post that. And
Okay.
yeah, and I hope it's a huge success. I think
Thank
it's
you.
really needed. So
Yeah. Anyways, I want to thank you, and I want to tell you there was something about this conversation. I did not look at the clock. I have no idea as to what time it is right now. I have no idea I have no idea how long we went for. It doesn't even matter to me.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. And like, again, living in the moment, maybe in one day we'll have this conversation in person.
Yeah, I hope so.
Maybe I'll come down to one of your, I won't go to that, not the APAC, the other one where you felt the one after the CPAC.
Oh,
the other one, you weren't too happy with that.
Yeah, I did my whole rant on that. I had such hopes for it, honestly. I really did. And I think there's a lot they're doing that they're trying to do that is right, actually. I just think that they kind of miss the key component of the First Amendment, and that's disturbing to me. There's a lot of good and bad in both of them, to be really honest. I can criticize and I can praise both. So,
but they're not case on the other side too.
Yeah, right, exactly.
A lot of Democrats are, but again, I got to be careful. No, can't say anything negative about anybody here.
You'll let me do all of that. I'll say all the negative things.
That's right. You have the internet.
Yeah.
But let's just hope that the stuff in Ukraine gets solved.
Yeah.
And people start getting their heads back on relative to COVID, go out, have meals, enjoy life.
Yes, exactly. Well, I'm going to be doing a performance, an aerial performance and speech, which I have not been doing because of the lockdown, but we're open here and I'm going to be doing that in the summer. So,
well, this was a lot of fun.
So fun. Thank you so much.
God bless you.